She doubted the beast. Until the ranger said, "He's just a puppy." Seren Vera's fingers slipped on the yoke, palms slick with sweat as the shuttle pitched violently. Emergency lights strobed crimson across her indigo skin, painting her silver hair in surreal shades as the AI's voice crackled through the shrieking wind. Warning, collision imminent, estimated survival probability, 29%. Just my luck, Seren muttered, breath ragged. She fought to steady the dying craft, silver eyes flicking between the bucking controls and the spiraling readouts. Lightning forked outside, illuminating jagged, alien trees through fractured glass. The shuttle lurched, engine screaming, then plummeted in a sickening drop. Her harness bit into her shoulders as the shuttle slammed into dense undergrowth. Metal screeched, branches shattered against the hull. Seren's head snapped back, stars bursting behind her eyes. She hung sideways, half-conscious, as acrid smoke billowed from the shattered panel beside her. The world spun. The thunder outside blended with the rapid-fire pulse of her heart. A sound, low, guttural, unearthly, rumbled from the jungle. It vibrated through the hull and her bones, a predator's warning. Seren's fingers scrabbled at the harness, panic surging. The beast's silhouette, massive and shifting, prowled just beyond the cracked viewport. She whispered a desperate plea, voice trembling. "Please, just let me make it out." The growl sounded again, closer, vibrating through the deck. Then a new voice, human, firm and commanding. "Nix, easy." The monstrous rumble fell silent. Seren froze, breath caught. A metallic shriek tore through the smoke as the emergency hatch was wrenched open, the warped metal yielding to strength and purpose. A figure stepped into the frame, backlit by the dying light. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark hair plastered to his brow, green eyes bright with urgency. He extended a hand, steady and sure. "Are you all right?" His voice cut through her daze, grounding her. Seren stared, mind catching on the strength in his arms, the calm in his gaze. But before she could answer, the massive head of a creature rose over his shoulder, light-absorbing hide rippling with muscle, 4 silver eyes glinting with alien intelligence. The sight froze her blood. She shrank against the wall, trembling. The man glanced back. "That's Nyx. She's with me. Looks scary, but she's a gentle giant." His words were so absurd that a strangled laugh escaped Seren's lips. I'm Seren. Seren Vera," she managed, voice breaking. Her hands shook as she tried to free herself. "Mason Drake," he said, focused and efficient. "Planetary Warden." He ducked inside, bracing the hatch with one powerful arm and working the harness release with the other. "Let's get you out of here." The shuttle groaned, metal straining. Seren's panic spiked. She reached for Mason's hand, clinging to his warmth, the steadiness of his grip anchoring her to reality. He eased her from the wreckage, muscles taut, moving with a gentleness that belied his size. Her knees buckled as her boots hit the ground. Mason caught her, strong arms around her waist, holding her upright. Her head spun, pressed against his chest. His heartbeat thundered, steady and reassuring, drowning out the chaos around them. "You're safe," he murmured, voice low and intimate. For the first time since the crash, Seren almost believed it. Nyx moved closer, massive paws silent on the leaf-littered ground. The beast's presence sent a shudder through Seren, but Mason kept a protective arm around her, his body a living barrier. "Nyx picked up your distress beacon," he explained, "brought me straight here." Seren's gaze flicked to the intricate harness along Nyx's skull, faint blue sigils pulsing where flesh met metal. "Neural link," Mason said, reading her thoughts. "She and I share a bit." Nyx lowered her enormous head, 4 silver eyes studying Seren with eerie intelligence. The beast rumbled, the sound oddly soothing. Mason grinned, scratching the creature's jaw. Told you. She's a sweetheart. The shuttle creaked ominously, warning of imminent collapse. Mason's grip tightened around Seren's waist. We need to move. Night's coming, and it's a long walk to the nearest relay station. Can you manage? Serene nodded, swallowing past the ache in her throat. I'll try. Mason's hand lingered, warm and firm, as if reluctant to let go. Stick close, he said softly. Nyx will scout ahead. I'll handle anything else. Seren wondered if her biggest danger wasn't lurking in the forest, but in the way his touch made her heartbeat stutter. As dusk descended, Mason led them along a narrow ridge. He moved with practiced confidence, guiding Seren over slick moss and tangled roots. When she faltered, he offered his hand without hesitation, his touch steady, fingers rough but gentle against her indigo skin. Nyx moved silently behind them, dark as shadow, ever vigilant. Needing distraction, Seren nodded toward the neural harness. How does it work? She asked, voice unsteady. Mason's thumb brushed across her knuckles before he released her hand. Bio-interface, he explained. We share senses, a bit of emotion. Not full thoughts, but enough to understand each other. She keeps me alive out here. His smile was wry, fond. I try to return the favor. Suddenly, Nyx halted, body rigid, nostrils flaring. The air thickened with threat. Mason's posture shifted instantly, protective, alert. He pressed a compact energy pistol into Seren's palm, his fingers wrapping briefly around hers. Just in case, he said quietly. The undergrowth exploded with sound, a shrill, layered cacophony. Sleek, many-legged predators slid from the shadows, eyes gleaming like coals. Mason moved between Seren and the threat, stance wide and sure. Nyx surged forward, her harness pulsing blue. She unleashed a roar, impossibly deep, that shook the trees and sent a wave of dread through the night. The hunters faltered, claws scraping against rock, then scattered into the gloom as Nyx roared again, the sound rolling through the forest like thunder. Mason grinned, tension easing as he scratched Nyx's massive jaw. The beast rumbled with pleasure, leaning into his touch. See, I'll bark. Seren stared, awe and disbelief warring on her face. Where she came from, nothing like this existed. No human could ever bond so closely with something so other. Mason met her gaze, green eyes searching. We need shelter. The hunters might regroup. He stepped closer, voice gentle. How are you holding up? I'm fine, she tried to say, but her legs betrayed her, trembling. Mason steadied her, fingers brushing a stray lock of silver hair from her brow. The touch sent a thrill through her, sharper than fear. There's a ranger outpost about an hour ahead, Mason said, his voice promising safety. Seren nodded, trusting him more than she dared admit, pulse racing for reasons she couldn't begin to explain as they set off into the deepening night. The outpost was carved straight into the stone flank of the ridge, a squat cabin with thick, reinforced windows and walls that bore the pitted scars of 100 storms. Mason keyed in a code, the heavy door hissing open on hydraulics. Nyx hesitated, then squeezed through with practiced grace, her massive form almost comically gentle as she curled up near a battered heater. The sudden warmth inside was a balm after the chill of the forest, and Seren's breath fogged in the air as she paused on the threshold. Before she could step fully inside, Mason shrugged off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. She opened her mouth to protest, her own nerves prickling at the intimacy, but the fabric was blessedly warm, carrying the subtle, steady scent of him, rain, earth, and something indefinably safe. She clung to it, letting it settle over her aching muscles as Mason moved about the cabin with easy familiarity. Sit, he said, nodding to a padded bench beside the little table. I'll get something hot. She perched on the edge, watching him fill a battered kettle, hands deft and sure. Nyx's breathing, deep and even, filled the space, the beast's head tucked against her own massive paws as she settled into a protective coil. The soft blue pulse of her neural harness washed the walls with gentle light, a silent promise that nothing would slip past her guard. Mason returned, balancing two steaming mugs. As he handed one to Seren, their fingers brushed, warm skin against cool indigo. She looked up, startled by the jolt that passed between them. "Thank you," she murmured, curling her hands around the mug. He settled beside her, his presence radiating a quiet confidence. "You're sure you're all right?" he asked, concern threading his voice. Serene nodded, taking a careful sip. "I think so. My people, we're not used to relying on humans. Or..." Her eyes flicked toward Nyx, who let out a low, contented rumble. "Predators, for that matter." A soft grin tugged at Mason's lips. "Yet you crossed half the galaxy to study alien life. That takes courage." She laughed, a brittle edge to the sound. "Maybe stubbornness. My research, it challenges everything my homeworld believes about interspecies trust." The confession felt dangerous, but Mason's gaze was steady, open. A sudden gust rattled the windows, rain lashing the thick glass. Nyx made a questioning noise, her hackles rising. Mason set his mug down and crossed to the bank of monitors embedded in the wall. His fingers danced across the controls, pulling up a swirl of ominous red and gold on the weather feed. "Major tempest coming in," he said. "Winds already topping 100 knots. Good thing we made it here when we did." Thunder cracked, the outpost shuddering. Seren flinched, nearly spilling her drink. Mason returned in an instant, slipping an arm around her shoulders. His touch was gentle but steady, anchoring her against the tremors. "You're safe," he whispered, close enough for her to feel the warmth of his breath against her hair. She let herself lean into him, her head coming to rest on his chest. Beneath the steady drumbeat of the storm, she could hear the slow, reassuring thud of his heart. She closed her eyes, letting the rhythm calm the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. For a while, the only sounds were the howl of the wind and the low hum of Nyx's breathing. Mason's arm remained a steady weight around her shoulders, his body heat chasing away the chill. Eventually, his voice rumbled quietly, inviting, "So, tell me about your work. The real story, not just the science." Seren hesitated, then found herself speaking, the words tumbling out into the safe darkness. "My people believe that prey and predator are locked in a cycle. That fear is the only thing keeping us alive. But my data, it doesn't add up. Species that learn trust, real, cross-species trust, can thrive together. The fear, I think, is taught, not something we're born with." Mason's fingers found her cheek, calloused yet gentle. He traced a line along her jaw, his touch feather-light. "You already changed," he murmured, his gaze searching hers. "Back at the shuttle, Nyx terrified you. Now you're more curious than scared. And me?" His thumb brushed her cheekbone, lingering. "You're not running from me anymore." A flush warmed her face, her silver eyes drawn to his. The storm surged, lights flickering. Mason's hand cupped her chin, lifting her face to his. "Seren," he whispered, her name heavy with promise. Before she could answer, the power died. Darkness swept through the cabin, deep and absolute. Seren's heart hammered. Instinctively, she reached for him, fingers digging into his shirt. Night vision flickered on, her pupils dilating to take in the faint outlines. Mason's smile glowing like a beacon, Nyx's harness a low blue shimmer. "Good timing," Mason said softly, his voice warm with humor and something deeper. Neither of them moved away. Outside, the wind howled and the storm raged, but within the outpost, the world had narrowed to the press of his body against hers and the steady reassurance of his hands. They drifted, time marked only by the rise and fall of the tempest. When exhaustion finally claimed her, Seren let herself rest, trusting that Mason and Nyx would keep the darkness at bay. Dawn crept in on a pale, watery light. Mason stood in the open doorway, silhouetted against the orange sky, scanning the horizon with practiced vigilance. Seren sat at the comms terminal, fingers flying over the controls as she tried for the 100th time to reach her university. Static filled her ears. The response code blinked on the screen. No record of arrival. The pit in her stomach deepened. The black box should have pinged headquarters, she said, frowning. All flight logs transmit on impact. I said it myself. Mason's face darkened as he crossed to her. You're sure you activated it? Positive. It's procedure. Nyx stirred from her spot by the heater, harness glowing a warning shade of amber. Mason's jaw tightened. If the signal never got out, someone tampered with your ship before you even crashed. He paced the length of the small cabin, agitation in every line of his body. We need to check the wreck. If someone comes back to wipe the evidence, we could lose any chance of finding out who did this. Seren's body ached, every muscle protesting the thought of another trek through the wilds. But the thought of sitting idle, waiting for answers to be erased, was worse. I'm going with you, she said, her voice more certain than she felt. He paused in front of her, his expression softening. He cupped her cheek in his palm, his thumb brushing over her skin. Stubborn scientist. Protective ranger, she countered, leaning into his touch. Her heart fluttered, a wild, hopeful thing. They moved quickly, Mason gathering supplies, energy pistols, medical kit, a handful of rations. Nyx led the way, nose low to the ground, harness glowing softly as she scanned the air for unfamiliar scents. The forest was thick with the dampness of spent rain, branches drooping under the weight of water, the trail made treacherous by slick moss and mud. Despite her exhaustion, Seren pressed on, every step powered by determination. Mason stayed close, eyes always on her, a steadying hand at her elbow when the path grew rough. Their silence was companionable, filled with shared glances and the unspoken promise of answers. When she stumbled on a hidden route, Mason caught her, strong arms wrapping around her waist. For a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them, breath mingling in the cool air. She felt the urge to say something, anything, but the words were lost as Nyx's low growl cut through the stillness. Mason's head snapped up, eyes narrowing as he scanned the trees. Nyx stood rigid, hackles raised, every muscle coiled. Serene's pulse hammered in her throat. Someone's been at the wreck, Mason murmured, every sense on high alert. Together they moved forward, bracing for whatever, or whoever, was waiting in the shattered shadows of the shuttle. Panels hung askew from the shuttle's battered hull, metal edges jagged where someone had ripped them open. The muddy earth was strewn with wires and scorched insulation. Seren barely paused at the threshold, heart pounding as she ducked inside, boots slipping in the debris. Her eyes darted from one ruined console to another, desperate for hope. It was worse than she feared. Key components had been torn out, circuits still warm from rough hands. She dropped to her knees by the main terminal, fingers sifting frantically through the wreckage. It's gone, she whispered, despair threading her voice. Her hands trembled as she pressed them to her mouth. But then, there, on a torn panel, a burn mark, sharp-edged, not from the crash, but from a plasma torch. Her pulse spiked. Wait. Outside, a twig snapped. Nyx's warning roar split the air, rolling thunderous through the trees. The sound was met with a human shout and the whine of charging energy weapons. Mason lunged, tackling Seren just as a barrage of blue-white blasts ripped through the shuttle's hull. He shielded her with his body, shoving her behind a buckled bulkhead, the air filled with the tang of ozone and burning metal. They landed tangled together. Mason's arm braced around her shoulders, his body pressed tight to hers. Serene's breath came fast and shallow, her back against the cold hull, Mason's heartbeat thundering against her. For a moment the world shrank to the heat of his skin, the sharp scent of his sweat, the undeniable thrill of their closeness, even as danger howled outside. She couldn't help herself. "Still think you should have left me behind?" she whispered, lips barely an inch from his. The corner of Mason's mouth twitched, his eyes flickering with equal parts worry and affection. "Terrible timing," he grumbled, the words pitched low, but he couldn't hide the smile in his voice. He glanced at her, meeting her gaze directly. "No, you belong at my side." Nyx's next roar was so fierce it rattled the hull, sending tremors through Seren's bones. The shouts outside faltered, boots crashing through undergrowth as the attackers retreated from the monstrous sound. Mason's urgency returned. He gripped Seren's arm, pulling her to her feet. "Those weren't scavengers," he said, voice tense. "They're after you." Serene's hand brushed against a scorched, half-melted chip wedged in the console. She pried it free, recognizing the emblem stamped into the casing. An angular, stylized sun. Corporate tech. High-end. Impossible to mistake. Her mind raced. "They want this buried," she said, the weight of realization pressing down on her. "Someone powerful." Mason silenced her with a gentle finger to her lips, a spark of electricity passing between them. His eyes held hers, fierce and protective. "Later, now. We move." The hull groaned. Nyx burst through a side opening, her eyes wild and silver bright. Mason swept Seren up, muscles straining as he lifted her onto Nyx's broad back. He swung up behind her in a single fluid motion, his arms circling her waist. "Hold on," he murmured, his breath warm at her ear. Seren melted into his embrace, her body pressed against his as Nyx bounded forward. Branches whipped past, the world reduced to the thunder of Nyx's paws, the pounding of Seren's heart, and the circle of Mason's arms anchoring her. The forest blurred, a rush of green and shadow, the threat left behind, at least for now. They rode hard, Nyx weaving between trees and leaping ravines with effortless strength. Finally, when Mason judged they were safe, he signaled Nyx to halt in a sheltered hollow deep in the hills. Seren slid from Nyx's back, legs unsteady, Mason's hand steadying her as she swayed. Only then did she notice the gash along his upper arm, blood staining the torn sleeve. "Mason, you're hurt. That's my fault," she said, guilt lacing her voice. He caught her hand before she could pull away, his grip gentle but unyielding. "You deserve the truth," he said, voice rough with emotion. Seren took a shaky breath, the weight of her secret pressing at her ribs. "My research, it's not just about cooperation between species." She fumbled with the stolen chip, holding it up so Mason could see the corporate seal. "It's about discovering that prey species fear. It was never natural. It was engineered. Centuries ago, someone, these corporations, they rewrote our genetics. Created a barrier so prey and predator would never trust, never unite. It kept us divided, easy to control." The forest fell silent, Nyx's massive head lowering to listen. Mason's eyes widened as the truth took shape. "That's why they sabotaged your ship," he said, connecting the threads. "If this got out, it would upend everything. They'd lose control." Seren nodded, her hands trembling. "All my life, I wondered why humans could bond with predators, why you and Nyx are possible, when on my world it's unthinkable. Now I know. The fear in us, it's a lie." Her voice cracked. "And I'm scared all over again, because I don't know who I am without it. Mason pulled her close, arms encircling her in a protective cocoon. She collapsed against his chest, tears streaking her indigo cheeks, soaking into his shirt. He held her fiercely, cradling her face with rough, gentle hands. "You're not alone," he whispered, his forehead pressed to hers. "Not ever." Their lips met, tentative at first, then hungry, desperate, full of hope and longing and everything left unsaid. Seren's hands fisted in his shirt, drawing him closer, her body pressed to his. The kiss deepened, the world narrowing to their shared breath, the shiver of connection that threatened to undo them both. When they parted, Seren hesitated, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. Mason cupped her cheek, thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "Don't stop," he murmured, voice thick with emotion. "Not now." A branch cracked, a harsh, deliberate sound. Nyx's hackles rose, a guttural warning building in her throat. Mason spun, pushing Seren behind him as a squad of armored figures emerged from the trees. Their armor gleamed with the same corporate insignia as the stolen chip, rifles trained and ready. At their head strode a woman with severe features and ice-pale eyes, Agent Solis, the corporation's security chief. She surveyed the scene with clinical detachment, eyes dismissing Mason before settling on Seren. "Dr. Vera, you will surrender the data, now. The Ranger has no jurisdiction here." Seren straightened, squaring her shoulders, the chip clutched tight in her fist. "This is proof. You hid the truth for generations." Her voice rang out, clear and defiant. Solis's expression barely flickered. "Your idealism is irrelevant. Hand it over, or face the consequences." Her voice was cold steel, her soldiers advancing in a tightening arc. Nyx stepped between Seren and the security team, her massive frame blocking the line of fire. Her harness pulsed with a deep warning blue, every muscle tense. Mason pressed closer to Seren, his hand finding hers, fingers entwined, steady and strong. Whatever happened next, they would face it together, united by truth, hope, and the impossible bond they had forged in the shadow of conspiracy. Nyx thundered through the tangled wilds, her muscles coiling and releasing in fluid surges as energy bolts seared the air above. The scent of ozone and burning bark mingled with the thudding of Seren's heart. She clung to Mason's back, her arms wrapped tight around his chest, feeling the powerful rhythm of his breath and the flex of his body in perfect sync with the alien beast beneath them. Another volley of bolts crackled overhead, gouging smoking furrows into the roots and stone. Mason twisted, scanning the terrain as Nyx bounded up an embankment, paws barely skimming the slick moss. He shouted above the chaos, "They're driving us east, toward the old comms tower." Seren's mind spun, searching for any memory that might give them an edge. Through the haze of panic, she remembered a survey map, forgotten trails, hidden cuts in the rock that the locals had used generations ago. She tightened her grip on Mason, pressing her lips to his ear. "There's a shortcut, North Fork, just before the dry riverbed. The canyon splits. Left path is a dead end, but if we hug the ridge, we can double back behind the tower." He glanced over his shoulder, eyes shining with something fierce. "Good thinking, Professor." Mason relayed the directions, pressing his knees to Nyx's flanks. The beast veered sharply, trusting Seren's guidance, plunging into the thickest tangle of the undergrowth. The world became a blur of motion and sound, Nyx's deep breaths, Mason's sure commands, Seren's pounding pulse. The canyons twisted and narrowed, stone walls looming on either side, echoes of their flight ricocheting in the gloom. Boots crashed behind them, but faded as Nyx darted through a narrow gap only she could fit. The labyrinth swallowed their pursuers. Seren exhaled, relief trembling in her limbs. They emerged beneath the shadow of the comms tower, its spindly frame rising from the stone like a skeleton of forgotten hopes. The structure was battered, but intact. Mason swung off Nyx's back, landing lightly and reaching up for Seren. His hands lingered at her waist as he helped her down, their eyes meeting in a breathless moment. Safe, for now. Nyx nudged Seren gently, her massive head butting against Seren's shoulder with surprising tenderness. Seren stroked her cheek, murmuring thanks. "She wants you to rest," Mason said, a smile tugging at his lips. "You earned it." But Seren shook her head, her curiosity sharper than exhaustion. "Not yet. Let me see your harness." Mason's expression softened. "Go ahead. She trusts you." He crouched beside Nyx, whispering in low tones. The beast lowered her head, exposing the intricate circuitry and bioluminescent filaments woven along her skull. Serene knelt, hands steady as she traced the delicate mesh. "It's more beautiful up close," she breathed. "Almost alive." She glanced at Mason. "How does it work?" He took her hand, guiding her fingers along the subtle grooves. "It's not about control. It's trust. The harness reads signals, emotions, intent, and echoes them back. Nyx chooses to listen. I only ever ask." His hand closed over hers, warm and solid. "When we're connected, I can feel her strength, her fear, her loyalty." Seren marveled at the partnership, the seamless exchange of courage and care between human and beast. Mason covered her hands with his own, pressing them gently to Nyx's hide. The three of them formed a circle, machine, animal, and sentient mind, bound not by dominance, but by the fragile, miraculous thread of trust. A sudden explosion shattered the peace. The tower rocked, dust raining from rusted girders as the ground trembled. Mason was on his feet in an instant, eyes wide, body tense. Serene's heart leapt in her chest. "They're here," she said, breathless. Mason met her gaze, fire sparking between them. "Any more bright ideas?" Seren grabbed his collar, pressing her mouth to his in a kiss that was fierce and fast, adrenaline and hope mingling on her lips. "Let's show them what real teamwork looks like." They moved with wordless coordination. Mason scanned the crumbling corridors, mapping exits and vantage points. Seren closed her eyes, focusing on Nyx, her senses prickling with the beast's heightened awareness. Patterns emerged, the metallic tang of approaching armor, the rhythm of footfalls echoing in the stone, the acrid breath of the wind. She relayed each detail to Mason, who plotted their every move. Outside, storm clouds built, electric blue streaks slashing the sky. Nyx responded to Seren's silent cues, slipping through the shadows and drawing fire away from the tower. Seren directed her with hand signals, her confidence growing with each successful feint. Mason watched her, pride and admiration etched across his face. Bolts hissed, soldiers shouted, but the trio moved as one, dodging, doubling back, using every inch of the ancient structure and the gathering storm. Seren's laughter rang out, high and wild, as they outmaneuvered the squads at every turn. Rain lashed the canyon, and Mason pulled her into his arms, kissing her deeply, tasting the storm and her exhilaration. "This is what we could be," he whispered, pressing his forehead to hers. "All of us, together." Nyx loosed a triumphant roar, her voice rolling across the hills. Seren felt old fears dissolve, replaced by something new, bold, unbreakable. She wasn't prey anymore. She was a partner, an equal, a force in her own right. The storm hit in full, a wall of debris and wind slamming through the canyon. Mason dragged Seren to a narrow ledge, Nyx curling around them, her massive body shielding them from the worst. Mason pressed Seren against the stone, his arms locked tight around her, his breath warm on her hair. The world shrank to the howl of the wind, Nyx's protective bulk, and the heat of Mason's body. Seren buried her face in his chest, letting the storm wash away what remained of her old life. Mason held her, hands tangled in her silver hair, promising safety and something more. When the chaos finally passed, the world was hushed, soft with rain and possibility. Mason and Serene sat entwined, their faces inches apart, hearts pounding. He kissed her again, desperate, passionate, their hands roaming, bodies pressed close. Seren clung to him, breathless, feeling the truth of their bond in every trembling touch. Dawn painted the sky in gold and violet, revealing a world transformed. Seren stretched, hair shimmering in the soft light, and teased. So, what now? Do we go wild? Mason grinned, tracing her cheek with his thumb. Maybe that's what we were meant for, he murmured, voice rough with longing and hope. She kissed him softly, tasting freedom on his lips. To be free. Nyx rumbled her agreement, her silver eyes shining with quiet joy. Mason and Seren, fingers entwined, leaned into each other, their bodies and hearts finally at rest. For the first time they belonged, not as predator and prey, not as human and alien, but simply as themselves, united and unafraid, ready for whatever new world awaited them. The first rays of sunrise slipped through the broken frame of the old comms tower, painting gold across Seren's indigo skin as she knelt beside Mason and Nyx. The world was hushed, the storm spent, only the soft hum of the neural harness breaking the silence. Then a sharp trill broke through the morning calm. The battered communicator on Seren's hip flickered to life, its signal unmistakable, a priority message encoded with the sigil of her mentor. She pressed the receiver to her ear, Mason watching her face. Professor Talon's voice crackled across the channel, urgent and alive. Seren, extraction is inbound, coordinates locked. We have a window, 30 minutes. Bring the data. You can escape. Your findings will change everything. Your people need you. Seren's heart twisted. For a moment she saw it all. A life in the stars, her work vindicated, fear erased from her kind forever. She could be safe, her name celebrated. Yet the vision was shadowed by Mason's green eyes and the steady, grounding weight of Nyx's presence beside her. Talon's voice softened, almost pleading. Seren, think of what's at stake. You have the proof. Our kind are still prisoners of a lie, bound by the fear the corporations engineered into us. You could set them free. She hesitated, every instinct warring inside her. Mason, arms folded, caught the last words. His jaw was tight, but his voice was gentle. You should go. This is bigger than us, Seren. She shook her head, tears bright in her silver eyes. No. My research shows what's possible, but you and Nyx, you showed me what's right. She thumbed the communicator, crushing it in her palm, sparks jumping between her fingers. I'm not running. Mason's lips met hers in a fierce, wordless promise. Nyx rumbled her approval, pressing her massive head against Serene's shoulder as if sealing their pact. They moved in tandem, preparing for the battle that would come. Mason mapped the terrain, setting traps in the brush and rigging old power cells as charges along the approach. Seren used her heightened senses, listening for movement, scenting the wind for unfamiliar chemicals. Nyx's neural harness pulsed in harmony with Serene's thoughts, their minds syncing in a dance of shared awareness. Inside the tower, Mason paused, hand on Seren's arm. You still have a choice, he said, voice low and rough. If you want to go, I'll help you get to that shuttle. She shook her head, stepping into his arms, kissing him slow and sure. I made my choice the moment you pulled me from that wreck. My work showed the theory, but you and Nyx showed me the truth. Outside, the distant thunder of engines echoed, The sky turned bloody with sunset as shuttles descended, disgorging waves of armored troops. Mason took Seren's hand as they crouched beside Nyx, watching the deployment. Seren's breath caught, not in fear, but in the knowledge that the enemy was afraid. Not just of her data, but of them, of what they represented. Agent Solis strode forward, face cold, weapon drawn. His sneer cut the air. This bond of yours is an aberration, unnatural. The system cannot tolerate it. Seren stepped out, holding her head high. You engineered that system. You divided us, rewrote our genes to keep us weak. But it's over. The truth is out. Solis's eyes narrowed. You've doomed yourself, Dr. Vera. Execute them. The assault was sudden, all sides erupting in gunfire and flash. Seren's senses expanded, catching the shuffle of boots, the hum of energy packs, the scent of adrenaline and fear. Mason and Nyx moved as one, Mason's aim precise, Nyx's massive form a living shield. Seren darted between them, grace and instinct combining, her presence the link that made them unstoppable. Solis bellowed above the chaos. You should be paralyzed by fear. Seren spun, ducking a bolt, voice ringing clear. You only made us believe we should be. That ends now. She pressed her palm to the data core, activating the projector. Blue light burst into the dusk, streaming genetic code and schematics across the battlefield. This is the proof. The fear isn't natural. It was written into us. Her voice was steady, fierce. And now everyone will know. Mason's voice carried across the din, relaying data through the tower's ancient array. It's broadcasting. Every relay on the planet is picking it up. The system can't hide you anymore. Solis's face twisted in rage. Kill them, now! But Nyx reared back, the harness pulsing a harmonic frequency, a roar not of anger, but of call. From the gathering shadows, shapes emerged, great beasts like Nyx, their hides shimmering, neural harnesses aglow. Each carried a human companion, faces grim but determined, and behind them came others, alien, human, predator, prey. Those who had learned trust, who had chosen partnership over division. Seren felt hope bloom in her chest, fierce and bright. She took Mason's hand, fingers entwined, lifting her chin. We're not a mistake, she called, voice echoing through the dusk. We're the future, and you can't stop us. The troops hesitated, faltering as they saw the tide turning, not with violence, but with something stronger. Solis screamed orders, but it was too late. The old fear that had once kept them apart was dissolving, replaced by the bonds the corporation had tried so hard to erase. Mason squeezed Seren's hand, pride shining in his eyes. You did this. You set them free. Nyx pressed close, her silver eyes reflecting the light of the new dawn rising behind them. Seren smiled, tears on her cheeks, as Mason bent to kiss her, the world remaking itself in the space between them. They had won, not through force, but by proving what the enemy most feared, that trust, partnership, and love were more powerful than any weapon or lie. And as the first true morning of their new world broke, Seren knew her choice had been the right one. Together they faced the horizon, alien, beast, and human, belonging at last to each other and to the future they had forged. Months later, the new research center overlooked a lush valley that had once been divided by invisible, ancient lines. The land was alive with movement, herds of lithe, antlered grazers mingling with sinewy, bright-eyed stalkers, predators and prey working together. The old choreography of fear replaced by a new, hesitant trust. Across the fields, the shimmer of neural harnesses caught the sun, signals of hope pulsing between partners. Inside the glass-walled atrium, Seren Vera moved through the morning bustle with a quiet confidence that still felt astonishing. Once, she had lived only in the margins, alien, scientist, always slightly apart. Now, delegates from a dozen worlds greeted her with nods of respect, and young researchers clustered eagerly around the data displays, comparing notes, their voices laced with excitement instead of dread. She paused at the observation window, watching a team of engineers, predator and prey, installing a new relay beacon together. A soft smile curved her lips as she imagined the next generation growing up free of the old, manufactured terror. The world was changing, and for the first time, she truly believed it would last. The doors hissed open, and Mason Drake strode in, the Conservation Corps insignia gleaming on the shoulder of his uniform. His boots were muddy, his hair tousled by the wind, but his green eyes were bright with pride. He crossed the floor in 3 long strides and caught Seren around the waist, pulling her close. "Morning, Professor," he murmured, burying his face in her silver hair. "You'll never believe the neural adaptation numbers. The latest cohort, full integration, no setbacks. I just watched a pack leader let a flock of nestlings ride on her back. It's working. Seren, it's really working." Seren's heart swelled. "We hoped it would. Now the next generation? We'll never know what we grew up fearing." Mason finished for her, squeezing her gently. He tilted her chin up, his smile teasing. "Though, I have to say, your hearing is sharper than Nyx's lately. I can't sneak up on you at all." She laughed, a rich, genuine sound that echoed across the hall. "You're just predictable, Ranger." She melted into his arms, the warmth of his body grounding her as it always had. A deep rumble interrupted them, followed by the unmistakable sound of claws tapping on the tiles. Nyx prowled into the atrium, her silver eyes gleaming with amusement. She nudged Seren's shoulder, tail flicking as if to say, "Save some affection for me." Seren laughed again, ruffling Nyx's fur. "Jealous, are we?" Nyx snorted, but her gaze was gentle. Together, the 3 of them walked through the sunlit corridors toward the assembly hall. The space pulsed with anticipation. Delegates from every corner of the system had gathered, eager to witness the new world being born and to take the first steps toward their own adaptation programs. Neural harnesses gleamed on the heads of alien beasts and their human companions, each pair a promise of what the future could hold. Mason squeezed Seren's hand as she approached the stage, offering silent encouragement. Nyx settled behind them, ever watchful. Seren stepped into the light, her silver hair catching the glow, and gazed out over the hall. For a heartbeat, she felt the weight of all that had come before: the crash, the fear, the battles, the choice that had changed everything. She drew a breath and let her voice carry. "Not long ago, I learned our greatest fears were manufactured, implanted in us to keep us divided. Today, as I look at you, I see what happens when we choose unity. Today, we begin something real." She found Mason and Nyx in the crowd, their eyes fixed on her, and love surged in her chest, steady, unbreakable. "We were told some boundaries can't be crossed, but I stand here as living proof that love and trust are stronger than any programming." Around her, neural harnesses shimmered in the dim, dozens of new bonded pairs glowing with hope. "Look at yourselves," Seren continued, her voice gaining strength. "You were all told that trust between predator and prey was impossible, that our natures were fixed. But now, you're proving that evolution can be chosen. We can rewrite what was done to us. We can choose partnership, and through that, freedom." The hall erupted in applause, voices of every pitch and tone blending in celebration. Seren's heart soared as Mason joined her on stage, Nyx padding to her side, their unity visible for all to see. For the first time, the future they had fought for felt not just possible, but real. As evening fell, the festivities moved outdoors. Twin moons rose over the valley, silver and blue, casting long shadows across the fields. Seren stood on the observation deck, the glass cool beneath her fingers. Mason slid behind her, arms slipping around her waist, his body warm and solid against her back. Nyx curled close, her massive head resting on the railing, sheltering them from the brisk night wind. They watched in silence as the valley below pulsed with life. Bonfires, laughter, the hum of neural harmonies echoing through the air. Mason's voice was soft at her ear. "Do you regret it? Staying, when you could have gone back? When you could have had safety?" Seren traced the insignia on his sleeve, her touch slow and deliberate. "Never. Safety's overrated. I want to help guide this new world, help others find what we found." She turned in his arms, her eyes shining. "Freedom is better." He kissed her, slow and deep, the kind of kiss that promised tomorrow. Nyx's answering rumble vibrated through the deck, her joy a living thing that wrapped around them both. Alien, beast, and human, together at last. Mason cupped Seren's face, his thumb brushing her cheek. "I love you," he whispered, his voice unsteady with emotion. "Both of you." Seren smiled, her arms around Mason and one hand buried in Nyx's soft fur. "Always," she replied, meaning it with every fiber of her being. The moons rose higher, bathing their entwined forms in silver light. In that moment, it was simple. Trust given and returned, family found in the wild as it was always meant to be. They had built something new, a love that transcended species, defied old fears, and proved that evolution could be a choice. The world was theirs, unbound, united, and free. Our story ends here. Make sure you subscribe, press the like button, and tell us in the comments what stood out to you the most in this video. Your feedback means a lot to our team. You'll discover many more captivating stories on our channel. See you in the next one.